Hello everyone, welcome to the next session on ABAP on HANA. In the last class, we started with the introduction of SQL Script in SAP HANA. We have discussed about the difference between programming language and procedural language, which is nothing but a scripting language. We also talked about the architecture behind the scenes, how the optimization is done when it comes to SQL script statements. So basically, system will divide the SQL script into two parts: the declarative logic, which is the data flow logic, which does the pure SQL statements, and the imperative logic, which is the orchestration logic responsible for if and but conditions. We also saw how does HANA creates the model graph, data graph, to run the operations in parallel mode, and what are the conditions in which it comes out of the parallel mode. So we looked at those options. Then we talked about creating data variables. There are three categories of data variables we have it. One is scalar data variables, second is table data variables, and then we have array type of data variables. We saw the primitive data types in SAP HANA. We also talked about containers in SAP HANA SQL script. There are three types of containers: anonymous block, procedures, and user defined functions. We also discussed about some funda foxes about how the SQL script initializes the variable. When do you create a variable? Are you going to use them using a smiley option? And then we also started creating our first SQL block is an anonymous block with import and export parameter, and we were unable to do that. So before we proceed, I will also quickly start noting down the syntax for different statements into the PPT so that you can refer the single PPT for all the syntaxes available in the system. So the first syntax is declare statement. This declare statement will be used to declare variables as well as exceptions in SAP HANA SQL script. So declare variable name, variable type, and then you will be having optionally equals to the default value if you want to assign it. Every statement must end with semicolon in SQL script. SQL script, unlike JavaScript, is case insensitive, so you can write in small and capital letter, everything is fine. Okay, this is how we create a variable in SQL script. How do we create an anonymous block? We write do begin, and if you want to give some parameters, we can give space parameter name space parameter type, and then we have to use equals to greater than symbol and question mark to provide the parameter values. You have to also define whether it's an input parameter or output parameter using in and out keywords, and then you have to put parameter name, which is an output parameter name here, whatever you like to give, and then equals to question mark. Question mark is because here you don't have a stored procedure. It's an anonymous block, so console has to take an input from you, and then you can write all your code inside, and you finally end it with the semicolon. That's your anonymous block syntax. Okay, so first is declare statement. So to create a data variable, create a scalar variable. Second is creating an anonymous block. And then yesterday we also observed that when we created an anonymous block to perform a simple addition operation, it was giving a syntax error. The reason of that syntax error, guys, is I have investigated it, and what I found is the system what we have it here is actually a production system. And in any production system, the anonymous block with parameters is not allowed. You can see here it's a production system. It's a HANA production system. And if I try to create a SQL anonymous block with parameters in this, it is not allowed. So if I just put here parameter x integer equals to question mark and another parameter y integer equals to question mark, because I want to take input of these two variables from the user, and finally I want to give the result out as an output parameter, result integer again equals to question mark. So that's the definition of my parameter begin. And now what I want to do is just want to use these variables inside my code to calculate an addition of these two values. So I can say result equals to my smiley, because I'm going to refer the variable plus y. This is the code which simply we are doing addition of two numbers which user will pass, and it produce the result. So I execute this, You can see it's giving me a syntax error because actually it's a production system, guys. Now, what I've done is, for just to showcase this scenario of anonymous PL SQL block, I have temporarily arranged a HANA system, which is not a production system. To show this feature, we can actually work with import and export parameters using using procedures and functions, user defined functions, which we will be taking the path towards that, so that we can work with import and export parameters with respect to our containers. So I will take this code as it is right now, put it in the PPT as an anonymous block, save this. Let's come back to this temporary HANA system, which I have arranged it for the demo, and I will paste the same code inside this. And let me execute this. What happens? So when you run an anonymous block, system will prepare a console to take input from you, because here you're putting question mark. Anything which you put it as a question mark, it is considered to be console input and console output. So this is your SQL console. So here only it will ask you the input and output will be produced. Okay, so this is not a production system, hence it will work here with the parameters as anonymous block. If it's a production system, you have to use anonymous block without parameters, or you go with procedures as well as user defined functions. That would be the option for you. Okay, let me execute this, and voila, you can see it's now executing it, the same code without any changes executing in this server, because it's not a production system, which means in your cal you will not be able to run anonymous block with parameters. But does that mean you can't test parameterized logic? You can, using procedures, which we will do it next. Let me pass 10, 20, execute this, and you can see the output result is 30. So that's your anonymous block execution in SQL script. So hope this is clear to each one of you how it is working. Okay, so I had already put this over here. So from here on, whatever example I'm going to take, I will take it not anonymous block, but I will take it in terms of procedure. Okay, so now if I want to convert the same logic what I've written here into a procedure, it's very simple. What you can do is just come back to our HDB production system, which is running from the cal, and I'd say create a procedure. So I remember the syntax for creating procedure. Let me just note down here: syntax for creating procedure with parameters, that if that is allowed, without with parameters. So anonymous block with parameter not allowed in production system. So syntax for that is create. So I'm writing full-fledged syntax for procedure. So create procedure. You need to use procedure name, whatever name you like. Remember, procedure name is unique per schema. So if you are using creating a procedure in one schema, same procedure name will not be allowed. But if you want to use same procedure name, you can create it in another schema. Okay, then comes is the parameters for the procedure. So space, parenthesis, parameter name, space, parameter type, and then you can put equals to. Of course, you have to also put it as input or output parameter. So in procedure you have three types of parameter: in parameter, then you can have out parameter, parameter name, parameter type, equals to, greater than, and then you have out parameter. This is an out parameter type, and then you can put in out parameter also, which is a bidirectional, like a changing parameter in ABAP program. So parameter name, parameter type, equals to question mark. So question mark I'm putting because I want to test this procedure. I want to test this procedure from the console directly. Okay, so typically when you're defining the procedure, this equals to is not required. This is required when you're calling the procedure. Okay, so right now I will remove it. Now what is the advantage of procedure over anonymous block? Can anybody tell me what is the advantage of using procedure over anonymous block to execute a SQL code? What is an advantage of procedure? Anyone? Anyone? What do you think? What is the advantage of using procedure over anonymous block which we saw? What is the advantage? Anybody? The advantage is compilation time. When you create a procedure, it is compiled and stored in the database permanently. Okay, but when you run an anonymous block every time it is compiling, because system has to now run this piece of code after compiling. But once you create a procedure, until it compiles successfully, database will not store it. But once your procedure is compiled, it is stored in the compiled format. So next time when you execute, there is no time it needs to for compilation. But every time when you run an anonymous block, it compiles. So this is one advantage in terms of performance in procedure. So procedure can be used or pre-compiled anonymous block with name. Basically they are stored with name. I cannot call anonymous now, they have a name. Okay, they are pre-compiled containers with name. Okay, pre-compiled containers with name. So next time when you want to execute, database don't have to spend time in compiling them again. Okay, that is one advantage. Second advantage, we can call procedure from another procedure. Correct, you cannot do that with anonymous block. You can't call it from somewhere else. Like in Fury, when we were learning Fury, remember we used to put anonymous function, and that function was very particular to that event. But the moment you put function in a controller, that function can be invoked from any button, any method, or any event of any UI5 control. Correct, same thing applies to procedure here. It's global, you can call it from wherever you want. Okay, so that's the beauty of procedure. So parameters of the procedure, the next thing is you have to put language. Next set of things are all optional. You can just go ahead with create procedure, procedure name, and done. It will create a procedure for you. Rest all the things are optional. So language, you can put SQL script or you can put R. You remember R language is used for machine learning in SAP HANA. We are not going to discuss R language here in this course. This will focus only on SQL script type of procedures. Next comes is default schema. You can put the schema name in which you would like to create the procedure. So schema name you can put. Then you can put reads SQL data. This will make the procedure as a read-only procedure. Now read-only procedure, if you by any chance put a DML statement which insert, update, delete any data record, or a DDL statement which creates, alter or drop a database object, it will give you an error because the data, the procedure is marked as a read-only procedure. It is, then HANA can definitely go ahead and optimize it, because you remember the golden rule of parallelization. If you don't have a DDL or DML statement, parallelization can be achieved. This was one of the rule of the game which we had learned. Parallelization can be achieved if we don't have a DDL or DML statement. So by putting the read only, you are making sure that procedure is risk free. It won't update anything in database. It won't change the state of the database. The next is you can put with encryption. What is the encryption of procedure? Sometimes you write some data in the procedure or logic in procedure which is highly confidential, and you don't want other developers to query the procedures table and look at your code. If you, I'll quickly show you in HANA system. I have a database table in SAP HANA system called procedures. In this database table, you can find all the list of procedures in database and their respective code. If I execute this, you can see all the procedures which are there in database and their respective code also you can find. This is the code. You see, complete definition is available here. So you don't want people to look at this code of your procedure by querying this procedures table. You can store the procedure in encrypted form. So nobody can query this procedures table and look at your procedure code, which has some sensitive information. So if you want to encrypt, you can put this option with encryption. Neither SAP can decrypt this, only HANA database can decrypt, because HANA database at runtime generates an encryption key for every procedure and stores it. When you open the procedure, when the developer who created the procedure opens it up, it decrypts and shows you the code. Okay, so that's about encryption, more secure way of creating your procedures. But typically it should only be used when it's truly needed. Okay, when it's truly needed. So then we have as, and then we write begin, and then we write all our code, and then we end the procedure like this. So in the begin and end piece here, we will write all our code for the procedure. Let's create a procedure with the same logic what we have done here, with addition of two parameters, two values, which was earlier not possible with anonymous block for us, so that we were not able to test this basically. So we will now replace it with the procedure, so we can test it with our cal server. So there is no difference, zero difference in terms of coding, in terms of parameter, between anonymous and procedure. It just makes it easy for you. If you have an anonymous block with parameter, you can test it right away, but it's also fine if we go with the procedure way. So that's a workaround I have taken. Okay, so let's create a procedure here. So I just move this code down and say create procedure, and procedure name, let's say my first proc. That's my procedure name. And then I can put parameters. So I put in parameter x as integer, in parameter y as integer, and finally the out parameter result as integer. These are all the three parameters I had put for my procedure. What else in the syntax? Language, SQL script is the language. Next, it doesn't matter whether you write in caps or small. I'm just writing in, something which I feel close. I do closely like this. So I'm used to this technique. Wherever I have something of this sort, which is not typically a keyword, I write in capital letter, which it's my style of code. Okay. Then default schema. I want to store my procedure in SAP A4H. Put it in double quote. This is the scheme I want to create my procedure. And then I can put reads SQL data, since I'm not gonna fire any update statement. Reads SQL data, okay, that I put. And then I don't want to do an encryption as begin. You can write in small letter also begin. And let's remove this below block and just execute this procedure to see if the procedure have been created in the system. Remember, any database object like table, procedure is also a database object. System would automatically convert your procedure name to uppercase. Okay, system will automatically convert your procedure name to uppercase. Okay, let me show you that. Since I've given here in lowercase, still you will see when system creates it, it converts it to the uppercase. Let's execute this statement. So provided we don't have a syntax error now, it should get created. Execute. You can see no error at the bottom, which means our procedure have been created successfully in the database. Let's go ahead and test it. Can anybody tell me how can I check if the procedure is existing in the database or not? Anybody? Just now I showed you some technique. What is that I can check? Absolutely right, Shilpa. We can query the procedures table in SAP HANA to see if the procedure have been created. Let's do that. I open another SQL console, and now I will put select star from procedures table, where procedure name like, and I can just put my was starting point. So my percentage, I'm just doing a pattern search in database, finding the procedures available wherever the procedures name starts with my. Okay, execute it. See, it's giving a warning also. It's a production system. That is the reason our anonymous block with parameter not working. Voila, you see, this is your procedure. It has been created successfully. You can find lot of important information about your procedure here. See here, two input parameters x and y we had put, one output parameter result we had put, in out parameter, no in out parameter was created. You can see it's not converted to Unicode. This is the code which you have written. See, complete code is visible for your procedure here, what you use to generate the procedure. Okay, that is the complete code of your procedure. It's a read-only procedure. It's a valid one in the system. It's activated. Then you have header only false. This also false. SQL script is the language used for creating the procedure. Very important table. You can find some information about your procedure. You see it converted in uppercase, the procedure name. Now let's call the procedure. So to call the procedure, syntax to call the procedure is very simple. Call procedure name. Okay, and then you can of course pass the parameters here like this. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to call my procedure. So call procedure name is my first proc. I don't have any code actually in this. My first proc. And I'll just pass my parameters question mark, and question mark output. Also, I want to see it. Maybe I will hard code the value right now 10 and 20, and then I want to see the result on the output. Execute this. You will see what? Anyone? Null. Do you remember one rule of the game which I told you yesterday? Anybody? Can you tell me what was the rule we discussed? One rule we discussed, very important rule we discussed. All the scalar parameters will be initialized with null value. You remember that rule? All the scalar parameters will be initialized with null value. You see, that's why you're getting null. Point two, we don't have a code also to calculate the summation. Let me do the calculation for summation. So I will say result equals to smiley, because I'm now using this referring the variable, and then y, smiley with y. Save this. But if I execute this, if I want to create the procedure, will system allow me to create the procedure? Yes or no? Anyone? If I execute and try to create, it will not. Why? Why it will not allow? Because same name. You already have a procedure with this name. So if I run this, it will give me an error. See? Incorrect syntax, this something it is telling, because the procedure already exists in the system. So what we will do, we will use create or replace. This is one command you can use, create or replace, where it will replace the code. During the replace option, if you put replace, you are not allowed to change parameters. This is one funda fox interview question also. When you use create or replace procedure command, we are not allowed to change parameters. We are only allowed to change code. Remember guys, otherwise it will not work. Okay, so if you want to still go ahead and create the procedure even with changing parameter, you can change in fact anything for that matter. Better to first drop procedure name, and then recreate. Okay, then just simply call create. That's what exactly will happen. Let's go ahead and do that. Instead of create or replace, I will just drop the procedure first and then recreate. Let me put this piece of code into the here. So I will just put third option, create a new simple procedure. Okay, so this code will, notepad file will be shared with you. You can use it. Now use this drop command only once after it is created. Okay guys, so for we'll use this after it's created. So let's come down. I executed once again. So you will see this code is now updating. Execute, successful drop, successful create. Let's go ahead and shoot. So I come back now, again run the same thing, and what we should expect is 30 as an output. There you go. It gives me summation of two values. Perfect. Now if I want to pass the value directly from here, will that be allowed in production? Let's try. For the case of procedure, will that allow me? I execute. Yes, you can see I got a panel now in the console to pump in my value. Only with anonymous block it is not allowing me to pump the value with parameters in the console. So now I can pass the values, let's say 30 and 60. Can anybody guess the result? What it should be? Please put it in the chat window. What will be the result you expect with 30 plus 60 as per our code? 90. Of course, let's execute. and there you go. 90 is the result. There's a question here, can we call procedure from our report program? Yes, of course. That's what ABAP managed data procedure is. We will come to that. ABAP managed data procedure. That's what exactly it is. We will come to that chapter. We are still far away from there. We are learning basic SQL script so that you can code it. Just the way we in Fiori, I taught you HTML5, CSS, JavaScript and jQuery before getting into Fiori and UI5. I taught you the base technologies. That's what exactly we're doing here. I'm first covering basics and then I will take you to advanced modules. Just the way you learned Fiori. Okay. I can directly jump in and create a AMDP, but you will not understand that because you got to refresh your SQL script. Okay, so that's our code for creating a very simple procedure. Let's move on and now look at some if condition, if and buts. As we all know, in every programming language, we typically have if condition. So what is the syntax for if condition? So syntax is pretty simple. If condition, in SQL script, you have to put then, and then you have to write all your code inside here. Else if, then next condition, again put then, again put your condition, end space if, send end with the semicolon. That's your if condition in SQL script. Let's go ahead and write it. I want to check if a given number is odd or even, just like your basic programming thing. So we'll use another procedure. So let me just remove this. I will remove the drop and I say check odd even, and I just have an input and I would have an output, and this time my output is a varchar because I'm going to return a character to say it's an odd value or even value. Varchar of 4 I'm returning. X will be an input integer. So now I come here inside and I'm going to check if my input value is can be divided by 2. It's an odd number. So I just put a if condition and then I will put a mod operator in SQL, put my value x comma 2. So basically mod will check if you divide by something is giving you a the final result as 0. Is this number divisible by 2 produces a 0 result. If this is true, then what we're gonna assign is result equals to even. It's an even number. Okay. Else result is equals to odd number. Very simple example like kids example, but just wanted to show you the if condition. That's how you code your if condition in SQL script. Very simple, just the way any other programming. Remember, when I started SQL script, I used to forget this then, and then I used to face issues. Okay, because we are used to JavaScript, ABAP. Now with me, actually, you guys have learned many technologies, so you may also miss out some of these statements. So remember the syntax always. So it will take some time for you to get used to the new syntax with these then and all these things. So that's okay. It will take time. Take a print of the PPT, take a print of the SQL session, what we are preparing here, and then practice each example. You will get used to it. Even for me, initially, it took a lot of time to get used to it. Okay, great. I used to face, so many issues to run simple examples, so many issues. But now I am kind of used to it because I've coded a lot of SQL procedures, even some complex ones. Great, let's execute it. It should get created. Yes, check odd even, it's been created. I will copy this code after it got successfully created and put it here. If condition, example, if condition. Next example we will put. So calling, I'm not putting the syntax for that. So calling, I will just pass a number. Let's say pass 10 and pass question mark in the output variable so we can see the result on the console. Click on execute. Oops, I have to put my procedure name check odd even. The procedure name is incorrect. It was my earlier procedure which had 3 arguments. Put the new procedure name, execute. Voila, you see it's an even number. Let's do a negative test. 11. Execute. It's an odd number. Fine, simple but effective example. Mod is an operator in SQL. Now you see, unlike JavaScript, there is no double equals to here for comparison. If you remember our JavaScript Fiori technology, where we learned Fiori. It was double equal to for comparison in JavaScript, but here it's equals to. Okay, assignment is also equals to, and comparison is also equals to. Okay, is that clear? Great. So move on to the next one. We will see some looping now. So how can we loop the data? So I was looking at some YouTube videos and I found there was one video completely on while loop, one video was completely only on for loop. So people are making fool of us like that. Okay, there are even standard SAP video which are just teaching basic SQL, select, insert, update, delete. Any kid can also do it. I mean, it's not a big deal. What is that you're teaching? You should teach something good, which you will see now in upcoming discussions. I will show you something really interesting. You can work with SQL statements, you can build collections, you can work with arrays, table parameters, split an array into a table. All that we'll see different complex logic which you can build using the SQL script. Moving on to the loops, very simple. So there are two loops. One is called while loop. So the syntax for while loop is, what will be the syntax for while loops? So loops are basically for iteration. So first is called while loop. The syntax is, you will say while a condition is true, it will keep on going. So you'll put a condition and then you will say do. Okay, and while. So it will keep on doing the iteration until the condition is true, or you implicitly or sorry explicitly write a break statement. Okay, so either you write break statement explicitly to break the loop, or you will your condition will fail. So as long as your condition is true, it will keep looping it. The moment condition goes the moment condition passes, it comes out of the loop. As long as condition is fulfilling, it will continue the loop. So let's go ahead and write a very simple while loop. So I want to basically calculate some kind of totaling. So I will pass a value into it and I want to just calculate total of a number, uh, multiply by 10. Okay, so let's do a while loop with a condition. As long as the condition is true, it will keep on looping. So let's come out and I'll say while example. I will pass again x and I will have a result variable of integer type as an output. So I will pass the value of x. Now if let's say I am passing value of x as, let's say, 10. Okay, so what I want 1 multiply by 10 plus 2 multiply by 10 plus 3 multiply by 10 plus up to 10 multiply by 10. That's what I want, and this is what I want in the result. Okay, this is the kind of calculation I want to do using while loop. So I will not keep writing this one by one. I will use a looping where you can see this 10 is fixed. The multiplier is fixed with every number 1, 2, 3, 4. So basically it has whatever number I am passing. If in the x I will pass 5, then it should go up to 5 and multiply each number up to 5 by 10 and then add all of that, and that should be my final result. That's the kind of example I am taking now. So let's code a while loop. So I will say while my value of x is greater than 0, keep doing this loop. Okay, now be very careful here. A while loop can turn into an infinite loop. A while loop can turn into infinite loop if your condition never goes true. Okay, as long as the condition is true, it will keep doing while. The moment condition meets the criteria, it comes out of while loop. So you should make sure that the value of x what you're passing, you are reducing it every time in the while loop. Okay, otherwise this will turn into an infinite while loop. So the first thing what I will do here is I will just do x minus 1 and assign back to the x. Okay, so if I pass 5, first loop pass, it comes here, it checks 5 is greater than 0, condition passes, it goes into the loop. It at the end it reduces 5 to 4. Then again it comes and check is 4 is greater than 0, yes, condition is true, it continues. Again it goes, continues until x becomes 0. It keeps on doing this loop. The moment my condition fails, it comes out of while loop. Okay, so this is very important. If I don't put this statement, it turns into infinite loop. Infinite times it will run. So be very careful with while loops. They can turn into infinite loops. Okay, and then here what I'm going to do is the value of x. So if user has passed 5, 1 2 3 4 5, that value of x I will multiply with 10. So that's my multiplication, and I will produce it in the result. So I will say result equals to my result plus x into 10. That's my logic to calculate, multiply each number with 10 and summation it at the end. Now see here, same result variable. Since here you are doing assignment, it's not coming with smiley, but since here you are referring the variable, it's coming with smiley. Okay, hope that rule is clear, that fundafox is clear to each one of you. So let me just execute this. The new procedure gets created. Okay, there is an error. Expression cannot used as assignment target. So you can see here, since I have a variable x as an input parameter, I am using that x here, which is causing a problem for me. I cannot use this as a final target actually. Okay, so it's saying expression cannot be used as an assignment target. Line number 11, column number 3 is a problem. So here I am assigning x equal to x minus 1, which is not allowed for me. So I have to create another variable which is just for counter purpose. So I say declare my cnt counter integer, and I will initialize with value of x, and this counter I can use now for decrementing my loop or continuing my loop. Okay, so let's save the, sorry, not save, execute it. You see, it got executed. I cannot use import, I cannot change the value of import parameter. Basically, if you know oops ABAP, you can also see this in ABAP. You cannot change value of input parameter in the method, correct? In ABAP also this applies. Same thing applies here. You cannot change the value of your in parameter. If you want to change the value, make it as an in out parameter, then you can change it. So it got created. Now let's look at the result. So I will come here and call the new function, which is while example, and I pass the value as, let's say, 3. So what will happen? What will be the result? 3 multiplied by 10 plus 2 multiplied by 10 plus 1 multiplied by 10. This will lead to 30 plus 20 50 plus 10 60. 60 should be the result. Let's go and test it. So with while loop execute. Oops. See, question mark. Why? Can anybody tell me the reason why it's a question mark? Why not 60? Anyone? What is the reason? There is one important rule which we have missed. Anyone? Can you guess why my result is being sent as a null or question mark? Question mark means null. Why my result is null? Why? Anyone? We just discussed some time back this thing. Why the result is null? Just some time back I showed you, or I told one Funda Fox. Let me go. Absolutely perfect answer, Shilpa. So if I go back to Funda Fox, scalar parameters. You see, the first Funda Fox of yesterday's class. These variables are initialized with null values. All the scalar parameters, whether even they are import export, they are initialized with null value. In this case, your result is an integer value. It is initialized with null, and in database, when you add a null with something, output becomes null. So you're adding something here, it doesn't care. What cares is if null is used to add in something, final result is also null. Okay, is that clear to everybody, that null plays an important role here? It's unlike ABAP program. In SQL script, null plays an important role. Okay, so you can see here it has added null with something, it produced a null at the end. So I have to basically change the result value to 0 at the beginning of my procedure so that it can produce the result. Now if I try to re-execute this, it will not work because my procedure is already created. So I have to drop the procedure. and execute, and there you go, got created. Let's run the same thing once again, execute, and you got your result 60. Is that clear to everybody what the null means in database? Is that clear to everyone? Your result was an integer parameter and it was defaulted to a null value, and any operation which you do with null produces a null. Whether you are doing addition, multiplication, whatsoever in database, it produces a null. Okay, so the result was not actually zero. The right side part of it was evaluating something, but since it was added with a null, it produced a null. Okay, there's a question, the procedure is created under one schema in HANA database. It depends on you. You can decide your schema name in which you would like to create your procedure. So I have selected our A4H schema so that I can, all my procedure are created under that only. Okay. So when you create procedure, I am choosing A4H schema. If you don't put schema name, by default, the procedure gets created in this big schema. This is the schema in which procedure gets created by default if you do not provide the name of the schema. Okay. So you will see all the procedures will be visible by far what we have created. You can see all our procedure, odd, even, my first proc, while example, all that has been created over here. Procedures have been created. Okay, great. Let's move on. So I will take this example of while loop and put it in our PPT, sorry, in our notepad file so that you can practice these examples later point of time. So this example is procedure with while loop. Okay, then let's move on. So this was the while loop. Next comes is the for loop. What is the syntax for for loop in SQL script? So it's very simple. It's a definite loop actually. Unlike while loop, it's a definite loop. There is no way, or there is less chances of this loop getting into an infinite loop. I don't think so it will even ever go to an infinite loop. That's why for loop is recommended over while loop. Until unless you truly need a while loop, you should go with for loop actually. So for the variable name, the counter variable name, and this counter variable name you don't need to declare separately. It gets created or declared automatically when you use the counter. Typically we use I, that's what we are used to. Then use in operator, and then you put starting index. Okay, start index from where, dot dot, end index from where to where. So typically we, let's say, want to loop 10 times, so we put 1 dot dot 10. Okay, if you want to loop 20 times, 1 dot dot 20, like that you can do it. So that's the starting and ending index, do, and then all your code inside, and end for. This is the syntax for creating for loop. Let's go ahead and create a very simple example. I want to create an employee table. Yesterday I've already taken this example, and I want to insert 10 records into the employee table. So I want to write a procedure this time with the DDL command to create a table in the system. So there's already this table which we created yesterday. I will delete it quickly. So drop table EMPS. This is what I've created yesterday. So I will drop it. Okay, it's not there. Was it EMP? Okay, the schema name I didn't put. EMPS was it? Okay, no problem. There is no table called EMP or EMPS. Fine, we are good. So we can come back. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a database table called employee table, and I'm going to insert some records in that table. And I just use a procedure name and just say create insert DB, and no parameters in this procedure. Very simple one. I'm just going to write here. So I will say create table. Now this time it's going to be not a read SQL data. It's not a read only procedure. Okay, let me go ahead but do a DDL command inside. Create table EMP Okay, you can also decide. So by default, database will create it as a row table. If you want to create a column table, column store table, use create column table. The table name employee ID as an integer, comma employee name as varchar 20. Varchar is equivalent to character. Okay, then primary key of this table is emp id. That's the primary key of the table. This would end up creating a database table for you in the system. Okay, then you can say for I in 1 to 10 do. So 10 times you do something. What is that I want to do? I want to insert a record in this employee table. And this record, the primary key is employee ID. So I will use this I loop index for inserting it into my table. So I will say insert into my EMP table values. Since you are referring a variable, you should use smiley I, comma. I can use some hard coded string. Let's say employee, and then I can use concatenation operator double pipe and again use my index I to concatenate and prepare the value. That's it. We are good. So this will create an employee table EMP, and I can also already specified the schema. So in this schema, it will create it, and then it will loop 10 times and insert 10 records in the employee table when you call the procedure. So let's execute it. There is an error. You see, reads SQL data as begin. Feature not supported. DDL is not supported for read-only procedure. Hope you got some meaning about it. What does it mean? Reads SQL data. The moment you put this, system doesn't allow you to create or write any DML or DDL statement in the procedure. Is that clear to everybody? What reads SQL data means? Which means if you are doing this, you are telling, indicating HANA, please use parallelization. But the moment you remove it, HANA will understand that I cannot go with parallelization because there's some DDL or DML used. Okay, because that was the rule of the game. I remove that. Now I can use it. That feature is supported. Execute. There's another error. Now it's giving another error. Identifier I must be declared. Okay, so I have to declare this I. This I was wrong. So I has to be declared as integer and just initialize it as 0, starting with 0. So you can skip the initialization also, but it's good to initialize so that null factor doesn't come into picture. Execute. Procedure got created. Let's shoot. Call the procedure, and this would create an employee table. So before the procedure is shooted, I just open a console and check if there's a table which exists now or not. So procedure got created, but I did not call it yet. Okay, it just got created. Would that create my database table? Anybody? When I executed this, will this create my database table? Anybody? Yes or no? When I already executed this piece of code, will this create my employee table? Anyone? Will this create my employee table? Incorrect answer. This statement, when you execute, it creates a procedure. Okay, it creates procedure. It doesn't execute the code. So this code was not executed. This code was just compiled and a procedure got created in the database, which means if you try to search a table EMP in system with SAP A4H schema, it is not there. Let's try. See, can you see, guys? Is that clear to everyone? Executing this statement doesn't mean you are executing procedure. It means compile this piece of code and create a procedure object in database. It doesn't mean create the table in database, which you have written here. Is that clear to everybody? Hope you are clear now. What does it mean? Everyone, I want to hear from you. Is that clear? Yes or not? Executing this piece of code means creating the procedure, not executing the procedure. This is the code procedure has. Okay, it didn't create the table. See, because Executing this means create the procedure, guys. Yes, we should call the procedure to perform all this stuff what we have it here. So call the procedure name and execute. No parameters, this executed. You see it got executed. And let's come to third session and shoot. Voila, your table got created with records in the database table. 10 records have been inserted. It's like just like activating the program. Absolutely right, Rohit. When you in ABAP program, you write a ABAP program. Let's say that program is picking up some data from database table. When you activate an ABAP program, would that execute the ABAP program? It will not. Okay. Similarly, here this whole thing is actually about creating the procedure, not about executing the procedure. Until you execute, the piece of code doesn't get triggered. This is the piece of code which you want to trigger. Now if I again call procedure, what will happen? Anybody? What will happen if I again call procedure? Will my execution go successfully, or will it cause any issue? It will dump, or you can call it as an error. There's no dump concept here. This is database. Okay, typically it's an exception. Why? Because we already created a table, and now we again trying to create the same table one more time on execution of a procedure. So this will lead to error. Press F8, you would see an error. You see, cannot use duplicate table name. And your table name, of course, this procedure is trying to create a table with emp name, and it's already there in the system. So this fails. So what do we typically do? We should now handle exception. So we should drop the table either. So now if I say drop table emp and execute again, it will work, but then it will lead to another problem next time. So if I execute, it didn't drop the table. Actually, I need to specify schema. I need to recreate the procedure. Okay, I need to recreate the procedure. So I need to drop the procedure and recreate the procedure itself, and then call the procedure, which will then first drop the table and recreate the table. And you see, yes, it got executed now. But now when I run this, what will happen? Will it now work again? Now when I run, will it work again? It will, because I am now first going to drop the table, and I'm going to create the table. Again drop the table, again create the table, again drop the table, again create the table. So every time I run this, it runs fine, no problem. See, it's running. I have executed many times actually. It's running. But is this a good idea? Now by any chance, if somebody drop the table manually, let's say if I drop table manually, okay, if I drop table manually now, so I drop the table and now I call procedure, what will happen? Anyone? Now if I call procedure, what will happen? Error. Why? Why this error? Just now by far it was running fine, because somebody manually deleted, dropped the table, and now your procedure is trying to drop the table, which is not there. Correct? Fair enough. Fair enough. So what should be the ideal logic? What should be your ideal logic? In all the cases it should work. So what you should do is, you should check, okay, you should check if the table is already created. If it is created, drop it. If it is not created, don't drop it. So you have to check existence of a table. So that you can do it with a select query on the tables statement. So there is a database table in SAP HANA called tables, where you can information about all the database tables. So you can call this database table tables, where your table name is whatever name you have given, I think emp. So where table name is equals to emp. Remember, every database object is converted to capital letter. So you just check this. If you find an entry, okay, I dropped it actually, so it is not there. So if you find an entry, you drop it, otherwise you don't drop it. That's the logic you got to write it. Now how will you also know if a statement fails? How will you get to know about it? You don't want to give an error to the user. Instead, you want to handle it. That's your exception handling. We will talk about exception handling in some time in today's class itself. Later point of time, I will show you some example for exception handling. Okay, so that's about your for loop in the system. So let me just copy this procedure so you guys can try this example. So be careful in your system. So for loop with some, this time DDL statements in procedure. Okay, let's move on. So after the for loop, we already discussed about for loop, we already discussed about while loop. Now we already also discussed about parameters, how to use parameters. Yeah, so how to pass parameters, input output parameters. Let's talk about exception handling. So we saw that when we are trying to drop the table once again, it's giving me an error because table itself is not there. Okay, so what happens, you can handle an exception case. So let me first run the procedure. So I just recreate this procedure one more time. Procedure got created. Now I call the procedure. You see it got called the procedure, and now it's also, you can find the table emp, and you will see some records in the emp table. Now what happens in this case, now in the procedure, when I call the procedure again, it tries to recreate the table, and the table already exists. So if I come here and execute the procedure, you see it's giving me an error because table already exists. So now I have to handle this exception and tell the system that my table is already there. Okay, my table is already there, so you just don't create it. Okay, so sorry, you drop the table. So dropping the table always is will also not be helpful, you will lead to the problem. So you drop the table only when an exception comes. So how do you define exception handling in SQL script? So first let me compare it with ABAP, and let me first brief you about what is exception handling. So some of us may not be aware about exception handling. What is an exception in general? An exception is a condition which is foreseen by a developer in the code. Okay, you have foreseen already this condition that it may come. Okay, can anybody tell me what is Murphy's law? Anybody, any science student? Anyone? Murphy's law? No googling please. What is Murphy's law? It properly defines exception handling. Murphy's law. Your schooling days are the most important time of your life. If you spare time and you look back, your schooling and college days plays a very important role in your life. Murphy's law. What is Murphy's law? Murphy's law says if there is a chance of something going to happen, or there is a chance of a mistake, there is a chance of a mistake to be committed, someday someone will commit it. Okay, if there is a chance of a mistake, there is a chance means it can happen, there's something which can happen. Okay, someday someone will do that mistake. So if you have written a code where you have a problem which can come, someday someone will do something in your system when the problem will come. Many times it happens as a developer, we are fighting against timeline, we are fighting against immense pressure by our manager, by our colleagues, everybody working in high pressure day and night, struggling so hard to get the deliverables done on time, and we know that this piece of code can blast anytime. If you already know it, believe me, Murphy's law apply. Someone someday will commit something which will lead to that problem in your code, and you know that you are intentionally doing this, but you can't help it, you because you got to beat the timeline. That's Murphy's law, and that's where exception handling comes in programming. It actually, exception handling was a concept which was introduced by early programmers by looking at Murphy's law. So if you foresee a problem which may come in your code, at some day someone will bring it up. So better you handle exceptions in your code. A good code is a code where 30% of your code is exception handling. If this is the case, then you are a very good developer. That's a thumb rule, and it's not a guideline by somebody. It's my personal opinion as an architect. I can give this a thumb rule which I have seen in my real time experience. I have seen it. 30% of your code, if it is exception handling, you are a pretty good developer. Okay, your code is robust. If 30% of code is error handling, exception handling, your code is robust. So exceptions are the conditions where you see, or where a developer foresee something bad may happen, something may come up, something bad for the program may happen, that you foresee as a developer. Like when you're writing a calculator, you foresee somebody would enter denominator value as 0. So anything in the denominator as a 0 would consider to infinite result. That's a exception. You already know it. Okay. Here in this case, you know that you're trying to drop a table, or you're trying to create a table which may already exist or which may have been deleted by far. You're trying to drop it. So someday somebody would delete it manually, and they will call your procedure, and procedure will blast. Okay. So that's basically exception handling. So how can we handle exceptions? So typically those who are ABAPers, or those who worked with SAP Fiori, you all know typically we write try catch block in our conventional programming. So we write try some piece of code which we want to put it under our scanner. We can make sure, or we are suspecting that this code may blast sometime, and then we do a catch, and then there's an exception class name into exception object. Okay, so this is your exception object, and end try. Okay, that's your typical ABAP coding for handling exception. In SQL script, this is done in little different way. So we first have to declare exception. So we write declare. So what is the syntax in SQL script for handling exception? Let me give the syntax. So we say declare exit handler for, and now from here onwards there are two options. Option one is SQL exception. This is option number one. And option number two here, so this part is fixed. Declare exit handler for SQL exception part is fixed. Afterwards, you can either use SQL exception. This is used in case when you don't know. You basically want to handle anything comes on your way, you want to handle that. That is SQL exception. So this is generic exception case. So any exception, anything blast, it will come to the block. Okay. Then another is SQL error code, and then code number. So in SQL, for all the known issues, SAP have divided the categories of errors in error codes. For example, if you're trying to drop a table which is not even there, there is a dedicated error code for that. So if you just want to handle that case, you can put SQL error code and the code number. Now, how do you identify the code number? I will tell you how can you identify the code number. And then after one of these options are chosen, after this one of the options are chosen by you, you can write your statement. So declare this, and then you can write all your code to support exception handling, and then finally you end the block. This is actually your catch block. Actually what you do in ABAP here, this is your catch block. So here you're telling what kind of exception may come, you're capturing it an object. Similarly here you are just declaring a block piece of code where whenever an exception comes, it will, this code will hit. Okay, this code will hit. So let me show you exception handling now. So what I will do is I will drop the table manually. First of all, if it is already there, it's there. Let me drop table, execute, it dropped. Now I just come here and there's no drop statement. Okay, there's a create statement. So okay, Let me just execute this. It will create first time. Now again execute, it will fail. Creation failed. So I want to now write an exception handler where I want to see if this creation fails, what will be the error code. So I will say, go to my syntax, declare exit handler for SQL exception. You don't need to write it in capital letter. You can write in small letter also. SQL exception. This is the generic block for any kind of exception. If even drop fails, it comes to this. Even if condition fails, it comes to, even you divide by 0, it comes to this block. Now here in this block, you can write a special statement called select and use a system variable SQL error code and query it from dummy. So dummy is a sample table. If you want to query something or read it, a predefined database variable, you can use dummy table, select star from dummy, that you can use in SAP HANA database to read a system variable, to print a system variable on the screen, and then finally end statement to end the block. So that's your piece of code which will now trigger. So let me first recreate the procedure. So system will get into this block and it will print the SQL error code on the screen when your create statement fails. Okay. Now why there's an error coming? It's giving me some error here. Incorrect syntax near end, line number 9, column number 2. Line number 9 is this, column number 2. Yeah, this I have to put this, should be fine. It's creating actually. It's creating the procedure. Let's run it. I'm not sure. So I run this now. It is going to create the table again. Table already there. I didn't put the drop statement. Execute it. It got executed, but it didn't give me anything actually. It didn't even print me the basically the code. Okay. It should have ideally printed the SQL code for me. Maybe I will take that as an output. So I will just create the table with this procedure with parameters. So I say out as return varchar 20. I say error code varchar 20 and just say this, select this error code. So declare exit handler for SQL exception, and then we have written some piece of code. It's giving me error, guys. I don't know why. Incorrect syntax error near 4. There is some problem in our code itself. There is some problem in our code itself. Let me check the syntax once again. So I don't want output parameter. Just this is fine. Language SQL script as begin, declare integer I, declare exit handler for SQL exception. Let me try passing this. Select SQL error code from dummy. This is fine. And then end this. Okay, I don't need to put end, guys, actually, because this semicolon is anyways ending my SQL exception code. If I have to write multiple lines in my try catch, in my catch block, if I have to write multiple lines here, then I have to put an end, otherwise it's not required. Okay, that was a mistake, I guess. Let's try. Yes, you can see it finally created my procedure without syntax error. So we will also see example when we will put a block with multiple lines of code inside the catch block. Okay, we will do that. So I will come back here and try to execute this. You should see the error code when it tried to recreate the table, what error code SQL is giving. Execute, and you see this time system executed my SQL procedure without any error, but you see error code is 288, which means if an object already exists and in a procedure you again try to create that object, error code for SQL is 288. You got your error code. So if this is the error code, I will drop the table and recreate the table. Okay, I will drop the table and recreate the table. So I will now write a piece of block. Okay, I will write a piece of block instead of this single statement. I will write a piece of block. In that piece of block, I will write condition where I will say if SQL error code is equals to 288, then drop the table first, emp, and then recreate the table once again. Table, create table. So create column table. This whole statement I am going to put it inside the block. Okay, else nothing, end if. So you can even ignore this else. So if this exception comes up, okay, if this exception comes up, then you will do it. Okay, so this is about my code for recreating the table, and then I will just end the block. So I will just put this whole thing once again outside, and I will put end the block. So what happens here now? This piece of code, this piece of code is a block. So what happens when you start the code, it comes here to declare exit handler. Okay, it comes and it has this piece of code which gets executed. It will only get executed when there is an exception of 288. System first will execute this statement. It tries to create a table. Now what happens, since table already there, it will throw an exception. It goes to declare statement. It checks if error code is 288. Yes, it drops the table, recreates the table, and comes out of this block and execute this piece of code. Let me repeat once again. When you start the execution of the procedure now, system will see this as a nested block. This whole thing is a nested block now. You see, I put declare and end. It's a nested block. System will come to the nested block. This condition is doesn't fulfill right now because SQL error code is empty. System goes to this condition now. Here in this condition, it tries to create the table. The table creation fails because there is an error of 288 type. It comes in the if condition. It drop the table, recreate the table, comes out of the block and creates 10 entries inside your table. Okay, is that clear to everyone what is happening here? Let's execute and see the result. So I just recreate the procedure and just now you can see the table is already there. Okay, there's an error here. Yeah, we can put this in else condition, not required, but there's an error it is giving here while inserting the data in the table, but I think it should work fine. Now there's also another statement which I have to write here called that is not helping. Let's try. I'm sure it should work fine. End 4 and then this end. This is all looks fine. Not sure why it's giving me an error. Okay, let me call it now. Execute. Yes, it's giving an error, but you can see the execution is successful. So by now you see it would have got executed, and if I try to query the table, I should be able to see my results. No, the table is not there. Why? It's not showing me the table. Okay, sorry, I'm doing a drop actually. I'm doing a drop. I'm sorry. I should do select star from table. So what happens is if I just execute my procedure, you see first execution is fine. It got created. Another execution I do. Second execution is also fine. See, no error. And if I just do a select of my table, I can see data it didn't come actually. So there is some problem. It's not triggering my for statement. There is some problem. It's not triggering my for statement. So it comes here to the if condition. It drops the table, creates the table, and then again it tries to create the table, but this time it won't get 288. It will get 288. Let me try putting this outside. I think that should be the right piece of code. I'll recreate the procedure. Now it's giving me some error, guys. Incorrect syntax for 4 inline column. This I will check it. So there is some problem in this piece of code. So what will happen here is, maybe I will just remove this create and I will just put this much. So whenever the SQL code is 288, just drop the table. Otherwise you don't drop the table. Okay, and that's the end of the block. Actually this end statement is not required now, because this if statement itself here, the semicolon is ending this whole block. Okay, execute it. Okay, let's come here, execute the procedure, and now let's run the query. Table itself is not there. It dropped the table and came out of procedure actually. Now if I re-execute the procedure, it should create the table and it should bring the result. You can see. So first time when you're calling the procedure, it's actually dropping and coming out of the procedure. Next time when you call, the create statement goes successful. It creates and adds the record. So you have to call the procedure 2 times actually in this case. Okay. So you have to call the procedure 2 times. First, it won't throw an error now, but it will drop the table. Next time, since the exception doesn't even trigger, it will create the table and insert the records. So that's the piece of code. You have it. Let me copy this and put it in our text file. So what we are doing now here is exception handling with create and drop. Now same thing can be achieved without this if condition, guys. So you see this if condition here 288, same thing can be achieved without this if condition using second syntax, where you can directly now write exception handler for error code. So you can see SQL error code and the code number. So this if condition is not required. You can just say declare exit handler for SQL error code 288 and remove this if condition. Just drop the EMP table and you are ready. This is another way of achieving same thing without if condition. So here you are directly writing this exception handler only for error category 288. Other exceptions will not be taken care. Remember, the previous logic can also take care multiple exceptions, any exception which can come, but this one only cater to the particular exception. Rest all exceptions, it will lead to errors only. Okay, so let me run this. It recreates the procedure and let me run the procedure. It first time drops the table, second time dropping is already done, so it creates it and execute. Here you see the result. Okay, so here next question here is, can we nest generic and specific exception like Java? How do we do in Java? Can we nest generic and specific? That's what exactly we're doing here. This is exactly we are doing. When you write here for SQL exception, you are actually saying generic exception. Any exception, any problem comes, it will come to the block. This is generic exception. The moment you put error code, you are here saying only for 288 this code should trigger. Other exception, let's say by any chance you're dividing some number with 0, that is another exception code. It will not handle it. So if you want to generically handle the exceptions, you have to put here SQL exception. Okay. Next question. Do we have any system variable to check executable statement like size subarc in ABAP? You can directly write the query. You are already sitting close to database. What you can do is, you can check after the table got inserted some records, you can check the table row count. Okay, so how do you check table row count in here? So it's pretty simple. You can say select count star from your database table and then get it into a variable. So I can just say cnt variable and I can return this count also indeed as a parameter. So I can say out cnt integer. That's my procedure. So after insertion is done, you can return the count of the records from the database table. Let's execute this. It's saying some problem. Scalar type is not allowed, CNT. Why? Select count star from this. Scalar type is not allowed, CNT. Out CNT integer. This is all okay. Why it's not allowing me scalar type here? There is some problem. So out count integer. No problem. We can use another statement called row count, but that will only work with HANA 2.0. No, Shilpa. Not equals to. We can just check setting value equals to 0. That we can check it here. Could be that problem. No. Select count star from this scalar parameter not allowed. It's just gonna get a single variable. Why it's not allowing me the count? It should ideally give me the number of records, and that I am going to get it in this. What I can also do is I can say select code executed, call this. Okay, I have to now put the parameter as a question mark because it has an out parameter and it's giving me right now null. That's fine. Can I use CNT equals to this? I think that is not allowed. How can I get you the count now? Should be possible to get me the count. Let me check. Should be possible. Let me just check it. So I will capture this select count star into a local variable. Let's say LT table. This is my local variable. I have captured it, and now I'll say select CNT from LT table, and I say get it in CNT. Let me see if this is allowed. No, scalar type not allowed. There is something which I'm missing. So basically I want to export the count of records out of it. So I can also do this. Select. Maybe I need to check this. Give me some time. Maybe in the next class I will show you how to export the count. So let me note down this. Export the count of records from a table. But actually you can get this count quite easily in your SQL console directly, not from the procedure, but you can just do it here. Select count star from your table name. But that's what we don't want. We want basically procedure to return me the number of records in the table. Okay, it's saying not found. Why it's saying that? Let me just remove this also. Execute this. Execute it. Yeah, you can see it's returning me total number of count of record, but basically I want to export it now from procedure. So that's what I will check it out and show you in the next session, how to export out basically the count of it. There is a way. Actually there is a way. I forgot that technique, so I will find out and I'll get back to you. So next question here is, the code was not resuming after exception. Is there any way to resume like in ABAP exception? So in ABAP exception, if you again throw the exception, it won't resume the code. So here what is happening is it's not resuming the code. For that, what you need to do is you need to declare nested blocks. If you want the code to resume once again, you have to create nested blocks so the code gets resumed. So what we will do is this piece of code has to work in conjunction in a in a piece of a block. So when this, because this is the culprit, if this throws an exception, it goes here, it triggers this. So this whole piece of code, I'm going to put it inside a nested block, so my outside code doesn't get affected. It will resume as it is. So let me just put this piece of code in a nested block. Do begin. I think we can just put begin and this piece of code, and I can do that. So now what I've done is this piece of code, which is here, it's throwing exception, here it is capturing, throwing, capturing. So once the exception is captured and it's been handled, the code comes out of the block and it will execute this piece of block. So that's how you can resume the execution. Okay, so that's what you can do now. Execute, got successfully executed. Now if I come here, what happens all the time, you don't have to run the procedure 2 times, because code will resume. This code will throw an exception when you try to create the table which is already there. This exception handler will handle the exception, it drops the table, and then it just ends the block, and then further outside whatever is there gets executed. So this is how you can handle resuming after exception by creating a nested SQL block using begin and end. Is that clear? Does that answer your question, Rohit? How to handle and resume the code, put the exception handling and the problematic code inside a block. That's what exactly you also do in ABAP. So whatever you feel is a problematic statement which could throw an exception, and the piece you put it in this try catch block, right? That's what you're doing here. So this code throws an exception, it catches here, and then it resumes the execution. Same thing you're doing here, you're putting it in a block, in a nested block. So now if I just run it, it's giving some error, I don't know why. Okay, there's no parameter actually now. Execute it. There is a parameter actually. Just come back, execute. Invalid name could not find view or table this. Not sure. I need to cross check this. Why this is not working. So nested block is not working. Okay, this is also I will note down. Resume after exception. This I will check it why nested block is not working. So let me execute one more time. It's creating the procedure properly with the nested block, but it is not resuming actually. So let me come here. In fact, it's giving me an error. It's rolling back the whole transaction actually. But actually it's giving me the data all the time. You see, select star from the table. So I think it's working fine. It's just giving me an error and information that my transaction it will roll back since an exception have occurred. It is rolling back the transaction, but every time I run the procedure, it's giving me the data. See, I executed, it gave me the data. Now again run the procedure. Earlier what was happening, it was just dropping the table, but now let me rerun the table, rerun the procedure. Some error comes, but that is just about transaction handling. And if I just come and execute, I'm still getting the data. See, so this is about resumption, it's working. So you remember last time I was executing first the procedure, it was dropping the table. Next time I was executing, it was creating and adding the entries. But now when I execute the procedure, it goes to this nested block, it throws an exception here, it catches the exception here. Whatever is there in this block remains within the block. You basically converge the energy within this area. So all your chain reaction is happening within this area. Outside things didn't get affected because of this. So once the exception comes, it handles it here, it performs this operation, comes out of the block and executes, resumes your execution, and it creates the records in the database table. So resume is anyways working. Okay, so take this. So this is about exception handling with resumption. So only nested block is the way to resume after execution. So you have to create nested block if you want to resume the execution after exception. So resume execution after exception in nested SQL block. This is actually very helpful. I will show you an example in OIA where we have to do this. We have to create a nested block like this, which controls the resume feature in our coding. If something goes bad, we want to handle that situation after it goes bad, and then we want to continue from where it went bad from there. Okay, that's about resume exception. So now I don't have to run the procedure 2 times. So I just have to check how to export the count of records from the table. Okay. Any other questions? Anyone? Okay. So let's move on. After exception handling, now we will discuss about cursors in database. So what is cursor in database? So we all know about these database concepts since college days, schooling days. So cursor is also a concept which we have learned in DBMS. Same thing, since HANA is also a database, hybrid database system, it also has concept of cursors. So whenever you want to work with multiple records in database, you have multiple ways to do that. So whenever we want to work with multiple records in database, we have multiple options. So first option is load all data records in a table parameter. So we didn't discuss about table parameter yet. We will talk about it in some time. But one way is you basically kind of internal table concept. You get all the records, load it in a table, and then manipulate using table or array for that matter. Second technique is use cursor. In cursor, the beauty is you can process records directly from DB table, line by line. Okay, that's where the cursor comes into picture. So you don't have to create additional table parameter to contain all the records. You can just process the data, creating a very simple cursor. So cursors are used to fetch data records from table row by row. That will be the definition in the interview. You should say row by row. If you want to fetch the record, you can use cursors. From where? From result of a query assigned to cursor. So you will assign always a query to a cursor. You have to write a SQL statement to a cursor so that whatever data that SQL statement or SQL query is returning, that cursor will loop through it line by line. Okay. So we always bind a query to cursor. Okay, that's what we always do. It is possible to avoid. Okay, it is possible to it is also possible to define parameterized cursor. Also possible to parameterize cursor. So if you want to avoid using cursors, you can do that, of course. But remember one golden rule, funda fox. You should avoid using cursors in database. So if possible, avoid using cursors in HANA DB. Why? Parallelization is a big problem. If you are using cursors, HANA cannot optimize, or HANA cannot do parallelization of your SQL query. So make sure that you avoid using cursors. But if it cannot be avoided, you can use cursors in HANA DB. So what are all the steps to process or create a cursor? So first of all, you have to declare cursor. Step 1 is to declare a cursor and assign to query, which is mandatory. So for that, syntax is declare cursor and then you can additionally put parameters to the cursor. It's possible to give parameters, all the parameters you have to give. Then you have to give name to the cursor, whatever name you would like to give for, and then you give your select query, because a cursor is always assigned to a select query. Once this is done, you need to open the cursor. So what does it mean, opening the cursor? Opening the cursor means it submit the query to database. Okay, the moment you say open cursor, cursor name, it submit this query what you have written to database. Declaration will not fire the query. Opening cursor will fire the query to the database. It selects the data from database table and loads it into the into the something called context area in HANA database. So data gets loaded. So query is submitted to DB and data is loaded in context area. Context area is nothing but memory allocated to the database. Okay, memory allocated to database. So there it loads all the data in the context area where all the manipulation takes place. In case of HANA database, the context area is nothing but CPU registers, because your data is kept in memory already in RAM. From the RAM, it loads to the CPU registers where the manipulation can take place now on this data. Okay, so the statement you use is open cursor, cursor name. That's what you will use. So declare cursor, cursor name for select statement. Open cursor will submit it to the database. After this is done, you can fetch record one by one. Okay, so you call fetch statement to process or manipulate the data one by one record. As you mentioned, as I mentioned earlier, cursor is only used to process record one by one, line by line, remember, not all the records in one shot. So you will say fetch, it will pull the first record. You will say again fetch, it pulls the second record. You will say again fetch, it pulls the third record. Where it will pull? In a variable. You have to define a variable in which it will pull the record. So you will say fetch your cursor name into your record name. Some record variable you have to declare in which it will fetch the record. And now you can use this record variable to access the values. So to access the values of fields, we can use record variable dot field name, the column name what you have fetched. The next, you will finally clean up things. So you will close the cursor using close cursor command. So it will basically settle down. It will free up the CPU memory which it has consumed for allocating or bringing the data from RAM to CPU. In CPU register, it will free up the memory once again. So cleanup is required. That's called close cursor. So let's create a very simple example. What my requirement is. Example. Pull all the products. Pull all the products from SNWD table, product table, based on product category. Okay, that's what we want. Pull all the records from this table based on product category. Actually, you can do this quite easily with a single select query, but just to show you the cursor example, I have taken this example. So you can actually do that here. Select, you can say star from SNWD underscore PD, where category of the product is equals to, let's say, notebooks. This will pull all the products of notebook category from my table. You see, these many products are there. So total 10 products are there with notebooks category. I will do same thing now using cursor to pull record one by one. So this will pull all records in one shot. You should use this to get better performance in SAP HANA, not use cursor. But in interview, if somebody asks you, you should be able to tell and write the cursor also. Okay, let's go ahead and do that. So I create a new procedure. So did I save this procedure already? Yes, resume. Yes, we saved it. Now say cursor, basic cursor example, and then just remove this part, and I just use it for read purpose only. So I can say procedure is read only. SQL data, read SQL data. That's the syntax we typically use for read only procedure. It's actually reads SQL data, and now I can define a cursor which can read the data. So I will also parameterize the cursor. So first let me read all the records, okay, and then I will just show you reading the records. So I'll say, I'll go by syntax. So I come here. So first declare the cursor, declare cursor command, and I just name it as C1. If parameters have to pass, I can pass the parameter, but right now I'm not passing. And C1 for, I'm just selecting all records from my database table SNWD or maybe I just select product ID for all the products without any condition here right now. This is not a parameterized cursor. I'm not putting any parameter right now. Okay, so I did that. It will just simply go and hit my database table, pull all the product IDs and load it in the CPU caches, provided I call open cursor statement. So this is just declaration part. When it will truly trigger the query is when you call open cursor. So open cursor C1. This would fire the query to database, pulls all the record from the column store RAM to the CPU it's loaded. Then you will call fetch to read first record from the CPU register and print it on the screen. Fetch and the cursor name C1 into, let's say I will declare a variable here, declare product ID as varchar 30. Okay, and I say fetch this into product ID, and I just want to print this on the screen. So let me declare an export parameter out. Actually I can do product ID here as varchar 30 as an output parameter, and you can just refer it using smiley. That's it. So it will go directly to my output parameter. Fetch cursor this into the output parameter, and then we can say close C1. Is that clear to everybody? Now you will say, Anubhav, my select query would read, let's say 500 products, but you did fetch only once, which means it will only fetch the first record product. I didn't print it on the screen, correct? Is that clear to everybody? Are you with me? What fetch cursor does? So when this query is fired, let's say this is your database, actual database, and this is your table. Your table has 30 records in the RAM. These 30 records got loaded in your CPU. Okay, in your CPU these 30 records got loaded. Now when you do fetch, your cursor will only point to the first record in the CPU. So you have 30 records here. So fetch will only fetch the first record, and in that first record product ID is there, so that is being assigned to this variable, and that's my output variable. So only first record is fetched and assigned to this variable, and then I close the cursor. So data goes back and settle down into the DB. Your data gets disappear from the CPU. It goes back to the RAM. Okay. So is that clear to everyone? What is going to happen here when you say fetch? It's just going to fetch the first product in the product ID variable and display you in the output. So let's at least run this and see on the system what happens. You should see one product ID in the output. I execute this. Okay, there's an error. Incorrect syntax near cursor line number 8. Open cursor C1. That's okay. What is the problem? Open cursor C1. Fetch cursor into this. Select declare cursor C1 for select statement. Okay, I have to just put schema name. Little bit careful. Still it is giving me an error here. Open cursor statement is giving an error. Let me check. line number 9. There is a problem here. Open cursor C1. I'm not sure why it's giving me an error here for open cursor C1. Ideally it should have worked. Fetch C1 into product ID. Let me try this in the new uh, okay, but I don't have a table in my HANA 2.0 server. It's not working. Ideally it should work. Let me try something here in this HANA server here. Maybe it's having some problem with my production system once again. And I will just change the table name, guys. So let me just quickly open up this and look at some table here in my current system, temporary system, because I am suspecting again in the productive system it's not allowing me to open a cursor. Okay, so I just came here, look at some demo tables. So let me just check some demo tables. Can I see some tables in system? So maybe I just quickly open another SQL console and look at some table SNWDPD if it is there. So select star from, is there any schema for my ECC? I don't see a schema for ECC. HANA SLT. Let me check this if I have some tables in this. Not sure about this. I can't actually check. I just search for tables where table name equals to. Let me just check, guys, in database. Is there any schema containing this table SNWD? It is not. Okay, I just like. Yes, the tables are there in SAP ABAP 1 schema actually. Okay, great. I think we can use SAP ABAP 1 schema. So let me just query SAP ABAP 1 dot snwd underscore pd table, product table. Insufficient privilege, not authorized. Can I grant privilege? No, I don't think so. I can't grant. I can grant privilege. I'll switch back and see if any other schema I do have these database tables available. They are all in SAP ABAP 1 only. So Rohit is asking one question, how to identify when to use cursor and when to use SQL. So when you want to process line by line, when you want to manipulate line by line, and you don't want to use a table parameter, which I will show you, then in that case you can use cursors. Okay. Like for example, if you want to trigger a native SQL statement directly from ABAP. So in ABAP system, you cannot declare a table type which pertains to SAP HANA. Okay. In that case, you have to use cursor in ABAP using ADBC to pull the data in ABAP system using cursor. Because in ABAP system, you can't create a table type. Right now, I have not discussed about table type in our classes. I will come to table type section probably in our next class. So that time you will understand that in ABAP, this table type cannot be created. So that point of time, you have only option to use cursor to pull the record line by line using native SQL statement. In fact, I will show you using same cursor example in our ABAP system. Okay. So let me complete this first. Let me find the right table. Actually, it's not allowing me to use the cursor here. Actually, there is some problem. Maybe let me just create a cursor for our table called tables itself. Okay. So, and then I just use table name and then I say varchar. Okay. Let me execute this procedure. Same error. Okay, which means it's not our HANA DB error. I think I have to check it. Something is wrong. Open cursor C1. Fetch, close, open. There is some mistake I am doing. Begin declare cursor C1 for select statement. And I think I have to pass blank in the parameters. Let me see. No. No, guys. There is something I'm missing. Definitely it's my syntax issue in my code. It's giving me an error consistently. So declare cursor, open cursor, fetch cursor, declare cursor C1 for select statement, selects product ID from snwd underscore pd table. My schema name also I had put. Why it's giving me an error? Incorrect syntax near. Let me try this in my uh, anonymous block. Let me try to create an anonymous block and see if it works with that. Do begin end and just put a cursor over here. Right now I'm not doing fetch, neither I'm doing a close. Execute it. It's giving me an error here also. Why? Open cursor C1 for incorrect syntax near declare. Declare cursor this for this. Is it causing an issue with the table name? No, I don't think so. There is something missing. There is something I'm missing, guys. I need to cross check that. So this is also, I think I will wait for some time. I need to cross check. I didn't tested this in this server. I've tested in my local HANA system because I have a local HANA installation also done in my computer where I've tested this. There it was working fine. So I'm not sure why in the cal it is not working. Maybe in the next session I will check in the cal directly and show you why the cursor opening is not working here. Ideally it should have worked. So before we move on, so what is the problem in this approach? The problem is when you're fetching the record from the table, from the cursor and putting it in your variable, it is only fetching one record and closing the cursor. So if you want multiple records to be displayed to the user, what will you use? So anybody in ABAP knowledge, when you want to bring multiple records from database in your ABAP program, which type of data object do you use in ABAP report? Yes, you use the internal table. Similarly here, if you are fetching the data records from a cursor and you're fetching multiple records, the fetch statement at a time gives you only one record. So you have to call the fetch in a loop to basically loop over all the records, and one by one record you will push it in an internal table like of structure which can hold multiple records. So there are two types of data objects here in SQL script. One is called table type of object, another called array type of object. So table type of object is a multi-column table, actually multiple variety of columns you can put, but in array you can only put one column of single type. So in that case we will be using, if you're fetching one column you can use an array, if you're fetching multiple columns you can use a table. Okay, so let me quickly explain you how can you create a table type here. So this cursor example I will take it in next session. Before that I will check in the cal. So cursor is pending and just move on to the table example. So create a table type in SQL script in HANA. So how can you create a table type in SQL script in HANA? So there are multiple syntaxes you can use to create a table. So the first syntax where you can create global table types are, you can use create table. Okay, let me write the syntax here. So how to create table types in SAP HANA SQL script. Create table types. So first syntax is use create table, and then you have to use type, your table type name, parenthesis, your first column, the column type, comma, second column type, and so on. This is how you can create a global table type in SAP HANA. Second way is use create type, your type name again, and then use as table, column, type, column 2, type. The third syntax, you can do it using directly when you're creating a table type parameter. You can use parameter name in the signature of procedure, put table, and then you have to put column, type, column 2, type, and so on. You can keep specifying your columns. This is another syntax to create a table type at runtime. Okay. Now, the first two will create a global table type for you. Okay. The first two will create a global table type for you. This one will create an inline table type. So how can you use a table type to return the data from a procedure? Let's quickly look at a simple example. So remember, table types can be used to hold multiple columns of different types. It could be a collection of integer, character, number, tiny integer, decimal, different things. You can hold it together. But when it comes to array is a single table, single column table. The moment you say single column, you can only have one type of variable, whether the whole array will be of varchar type, whole array could be of integer type. Okay, that's a difference between table type and array. Now, disadvantage of array is we cannot use array in signature of procedure. It's not possible. Okay, so let me first show you creating a table type and show you an example of procedure where I will return the values out of procedure using table type. So let me quickly come back and we will create a quick procedure with the table type. So first I will say create procedure table type basic, and then I will create a table type here. Let's say I want to return the product ID as well as product category information from my product table. Okay, so I want to return that. So I will create a return out and say return table ret product, and then I can say table, and in this I can say product ID as varchar 20, and then I can say category as varchar 60. Okay, that's how I created a table type. So you see, this table is a keyword actually. Okay, so return product as an output variable of this procedure I am creating to return a table out. Now this procedure as begin end, that's my procedure I had created. Okay, you can use language SQL script as a read-only procedure. All that you can put it as part of your procedure. It's possible to put all that those statements. Now once this is defined, I will now write some code to get my data of from select query and map it directly to this return product. So you use return product equals to select product ID comma category from snwd underscore pd table schema name SAP A4H dot, and my table name is snwd underscore pd. So that's what will return now multiple records. So in open fetch cursor thing, you were actually getting one record at a time. I will show you in next class using cursor with an array where you can also return multiple values, but this is one of the best way to return multiple columns of a table out of a procedure. Okay, let's execute it. Okay, there's a syntax error. Did I miss to put something? Language SQL script, do I have to push? As begin end. This is all fine. Why it's giving me an error? Incorrect syntax near SQL script. Okay, I have to put a space after this. After the procedure name, put a space and then parameters execute. Okay, again it's giving me an error. I'm wondering why it's giving me continuously errors. Let me just open another SQL console and try. Output parameter, return product, table. I missed one more parenthesis, ending parenthesis. I missed it, guys. That's why. Let me execute. Yes, you can see it got executed successfully. So the procedure table type basic got created. Okay, let's execute this procedure in our SQL console now. So I just say call procedure name and then question mark to just show the result on the console. Execute it. And you can see it is now giving me two columns, which is giving me all the products and their categories. Okay, so that's how you can use table types. So this is a local table type I have created directly in the parameter. Okay, now I'll also show you some interesting thing. I can create an in parameter called category, and then I can use it as a varchar, let's say varchar 60, to pass the category from the user and use this in my input parameter where clause category is equals to my input parameter category. See smiley, and my parameter is being used. I can execute after dropping the procedure, recreate the procedure. Execute. It recreated. Let me come back now. I have to pass the product category as an input parameter. So I will only want to see now notebooks. So I pass this value as in my argument and will receive the values of this. Okay, I have to just table type basic. That's what it is. Call my procedure and put two question marks, one for input parameter, one for output parameter, and execute it. I had to close this. Some problem with my console. Let me open a new console and call this table type basic once again. First parameter is input, second is output. Execute it. It's asking me now to pass the category of the product. I pass notebooks and execute. And you can see only the notebook category of products have been written from my procedure. So that's how you can create an inline table output parameter. Okay, so I will use this piece of code and put it here in our SQL script. Create a table type in SQL script with returning inline table declaration. Now you can create the same thing as a table type in SAP HANA, and that will be persisted permanently. So how can we create a table type and then refer it? So it's very, very simple. What you do is you will come here to the HANA console and say create. So you can use any of the syntax which I just told you here. So either you can use create table type, this table type columns, or create type this as table. The most popular syntax amongst developer is the second one. So create type this as table. Create type, let's say tt underscore Anubhav as table. And now I can say category or product ID. So this whole thing basically. So I will cut this whole thing and paste it here, and that's it. So this will now create a table type Anubhav in the system at the system level in my schema. And this output parameter, I don't have to do this inline declaration. I can just put tt Anubhav. That's it. This is both these things are same. Okay, so either you do inline or you do like this. Let me execute it. It will create a table type Anubhav and recreate my procedure. Okay, now general warning it is giving. It's not an error, it's just a general warning. Okay, we cannot refer existing SE11 structures over here. That is not possible. So there is a question here. Can I use SE11 structure in SAP HANA procedure? No, you cannot. You have to create a type like this. Okay, so now if I want to show you this table type, it should have been created, I think. Let me just check. Where can I show you? So I go to procedure, table types, and I think if the schema is correct, you can see TT Anubhav has been created here in my table types in my SAP A4H schema. Okay, this has been created over here. So it will give you the same result the way it was giving you earlier. There's no change. I execute again. Now this time you are using a global table type. So I say notebooks. It gives you same result. You can see it's giving me same result. But this time I referred a global table type rather than local one. Now another interesting thing, you can completely remove this table type declaration. Not at all required. Okay. Okay. But it's actually required here if you want to return it out. Okay. You need this. But internally, this particular piece of code, whenever it is giving you the result, this variable what you have defined here, you don't need to define this variable anywhere. I will show you an example of such a imperative logic, declarative logic in our next class, where I will read the data. I will create a procedure which is kind of a read only procedure, and which will run in parallel. Actually HANA will apply a parallelization on that particular procedure. Pure declarative logic procedure I will create with the data flow, where I will create multiple variables and pass one output of one variable to another variable, and all that I will show you in next class. So at least hope you're clear with table types in SAP HANA. Similarly, we will talk about arrays also in our next class. So this is about creating table type locally, option one, and then second example is globally, global table type TT Anubhav. Unfortunately, I was unable to show you the cursor today. This was a very important topic, because in ABAP, when you want to call a query in HANA directly from ABAP, one way you have is ADBC, another way you have is as native SQL statement directly in execute SQL command in ABAP. So there you have to use cursor, because these table type you cannot declare in ABAP. Okay, you can't declare a table type like this in ABAP. Of course, you can declare table type in dictionary, but those cannot be used in HANA. So in that case, you have to use cursor, sometimes depending on requirement. So cursor was something which I could not show you. Also, I could not show you getting the total number of records, from the table. So that also I could not show you. These two things I will cross check in the system. The system of in the cal is little weird. I mean, sometimes it's behaving little weird. Like I was surprised to see that it was not supporting the parameters with do begin, which is anonymous block. And I researched a lot and finally found it that it's not possible in production system, because it's a security risk on the system. I will also show you some operations which are not supported in actually in HANA 1.0 SP10, because our current cal system is using HANA 1.0 SP10, and some features are not supported, like insert feature in an array. So let me quickly show you that feature. If you want to create an array in SAP HANA, how can you create it, and how can you insert record in your array, or also in the table. So since we started table, let me quickly show you inserting a record in the table, and you will get to know that what is not supported actually in HANA. So let me show you here in this example itself. What I want now is I want to basically create a table, fill that table with some records, and finally show the output. A very simple table I want to create, not firing any query. Okay, so let me just show you pure table example. So first of all, I'll remove this. I create a simple table, and in this I will just put parameter. So in this, I want to just create a table with an output, let's say my tab, and this table uh, which I'm creating here will be of type something. So I just say table, and I just want to put an amount field in this of integer type. So this is the table I have created now. Here inline table I am creating. You can also create a table type using the way I showed you just now. Okay, type Anubhav. And now in this, I want to add some records to this table. So one way to add records in the table is use your variable dot your field name amount, and then you put index 1, and then you can say, let's say 500. Then my tab, I want to add another record, column name, because a table can have multiple columns, guys. So you can add values like this, 300, and that's it. I will run this procedure now. I will execute this simple table procedure. And once you run it, you will see the output coming on the result. Why it's not working? Incorrect. Okay, since I'm assigning, I don't have to use smiley. Sorry. Execute it. So out my table amount as integer. This is okay. Then my tab dot my field parenthesis 500 and 300 I put. Why it's not working? Incorrect syntax error. Again, it's giving out my table dot amount field is there. SQL script as begin. Same code. Let me try with an anonymous PL SQL. Do begin. It was working actually. It's a problem. And I use here my tab dot amount field with the index 1 equals to 200 and end. Incorrect syntax error near. Nonsense. Okay, I have to just put equals to question mark. Execute. This is pretty bad. Out my table amount as integer. This is a table I've created, language SQL script as begin, and I'm now trying to insert some data into this. It's giving me an error. Let me take the same code and put it in our HANA 2.0 here and execute it here. You can see same code is running fine here in the HANA 2.0. So you see same code with table is not working with 1.0 SP10 because this syntax has been introduced from HANA 2.0 onwards to insert the record in the table type like this. You can see same code is running in 2.0. So sometimes you may feel that there is this thing which Anubhav has taught me, but it's not working because it may be a difference in HANA versions. In HANA 2.0, SAP have started supporting insert operation in the table type. But with HANA 1.0, it was not possible. You see here, same code is giving me an error, syntax error with this bracket. And now you see same code have worked here. It has created a procedure where I'm inserting 500, 300 in this table. And let me now call this procedure simple table in my call statement. It will give you the result, the records which you have inserted. Call, procedure name, and question mark to show you the result on the UI. Execute and see two records were inserted in your table type. There's another syntax which is also possible called my tab dot insert, and you can put the value here, let's say 300 or let's say 240, 140, and again just recreate the procedure. So drop and recreate. So I'm suspecting my cursor is also having the same problem. It's not working on my version. Invalid schema name my tab. Okay, I have to just put this. The draw procedure. Why the same logic is now not working here? My tab. So same logic was not working in HANA 1.0 when I was trying to add records to my table. And now you can see, okay, so there is some problem. Simple table. Let me drop this procedure. I will recreate the procedure. Invalid name of function or procedure, simple table. Why? Let me recreate. Invalid schema name, my tab. Okay, I have to use this variable. Okay, so when you're doing insert, guys, first of all, you have to use, because you're referencing now a variable, you are not assigning. There is no equals to operator involved here. So you have to use the smiley over here for your variable. Then you have to also put in insert statement the index at the level of which you want to insert the new record. So I want to insert the new record at index number 3. So first of all, in the parentheses, you have to put the value, comma, the index where you want to insert the record. This code will work fine. Let me execute. Yes, it worked. Let me come back, recall the procedure. You're going to see 3 values added inside this. Same code will not work in ABAP HANA 1.0. So if I come back to our code here and I try to run this, it will not work. It will give me 100 errors. So that's how you work with table type in SAP HANA SQL Script. Some of the code related to table type will not work in HANA 1.0. So be very careful. This will confuse you in some cases when your HANA server version is on 1.0. If it's on 2.0, you can of course have luxury to manipulate the data in the table type directly. Okay. So this amount field is here. I had put it. It goes by index. See, there is only one field, so I had put it here 140 as amount field. So if you have more than one field, basically you can put comma and all the field values. The fields which you will not mention here will be initialized with null value by default. Okay, will be initialized with null value by default. That's what will be the output. So I am put, remember guys, this is very important point. Some of your code may not work in our cal server. Like you are seeing, I am also finding it little difficult. Sometimes my code is not working. It could be because of your HANA server version issue. You can, so make sure that you try this kind of code, or you also check the SQL reference library where you can find that which code will work for what version. Okay, I will show you that in a minute. So let me take this code and I will also put this code with a warning that the code will only work with HANA 2.0. So working with table variables, warning, only relevant for HANA 2.0. This is the code. So in our cal server it will not work, and I think to some extent some of the problems in the cursor is also happening because of that reason. Our cursor code is also not working because of that reason. So maybe I will cross check that what the reference library says about it, and I will show you in the next session how to make the cursor work. So these small statements in SQL script makes us confident to write an AMDP later point of time. Now I wanted to quickly also show you some ready-made variables which are available with table types. So one thing you can check if the table type is empty or not. So how can you check that? So you can use if statement, and there is a ready-made function in HANA called is underscore empty. This way you can check if the table is empty and pass your table object here, my tab. Whenever you want to reference, use smiley. If this is empty, then do something, else you don't do anything. So if your table is empty, it's gonna go inside this if condition, and here you can write some piece of code. Okay, else I will calculate the count number of records available in my table, and that can easily be done by record count. Again, this I did not showed you because it doesn't work in HANA 1.0. This also works on your database table directly. Record underscore count function, ready-made function, which you can use to count the number of records in the table, even database table, even your table variable. So I could have told you the answer of this question, which is pending here. Export the count of number of records in the table. I could have easily answered because this is the answer, but it will not work with 1.0. So I have to check how can we export the number of records from our table variable outside. So it will not work with the record count. It will only work in 2.0. I will show you in a minute, copying the same code to 1.0, and then I can have a variable here to return the count. So I can say out cnt integer, and I can just say cnt equals to. So these things you have to keep it in mind when you're working with HANA versions. Okay, and just now I will execute this. So since my table is not empty, it go to else code. It will count the number of records and also print me the number of records. Let me recreate the procedure. So drop procedure and recreate it. Execute. Some syntax error. So out this integer, that's also fine. Drop procedure. Incorrect semicolon. Till here it is fine. Is empty, I'm checking. Okay, I had put a semicolon in else part, not required. Execute it. Yes, works good. Let's go back and run the procedure. Now you're going to see two output parameters. So I will put two question marks to see the output. What will be the count of records? Anybody? How many records we have in our table? Table type, internal table. You can consider table type as internal table here. It's 3, not 10. Execute. You see 3, out is 3. See another result set, these 3 records you have in your table. Okay. So that's how you can work with HANA 2.0 with some ready-made functions available. Now, if I just remove these 3 lines of code, your table will be empty and it will not give you any count output. Okay, it will not give you any count output. Like before that, let me copy this piece of code and put it here. Ready-made functions with table. Again, warning, only works with HANA 2.0. Okay, now comes to the next quick topic I want to show you is user defined exceptions. So if you want to define your own exceptions in SAP HANA SQL script, you can do it very easily. And that is done using statement called signal. Okay, you can call signal statement, SQL error code, and some code between 10,000 to some value is there. So I will show you how to define user exception. So let me remove these records from the table. And now, of course, this if condition will pass because my table is empty. So I'm going to raise an exception. So in ABAP, you call raise exception type, exception name. Here you call signal. Signal, SQL error code. And since it's a user defined exception, I can give some random code. So let me give 10. But this will give me an error because HANA supports custom exceptions with SQL error code above 10,000. So let me execute this. You will get an error. You see, you got an error here, and it says that user defined exception range is 10,000 to 19999. Error code has to be between these number. Okay, this is an interview question, also certification question in SQL script. What will be the range of custom exceptions? 10,000 to 19,999. So it has to be 10,000, starting from 10,000, whatever you can put above than that. Execute it. It gets compiled successfully. Some output variable is not assigned. Okay, since your output variable is not assigned, it's giving you a exception again. So maybe I just assign it later. Okay, I will do an assignment later. So my tab my tab is dot amount, first record equals to 300. Execute. Again, for this variable it's giving me an error. Let me just do this here. Since I'm doing assignment, no smiley required. Execute. It got executed. And now what happens when your code runs from top to bottom? It comes to this statement. By this time table is empty. It will throw a SQL error. Let me come and execute the procedure. You can see an error is being thrown. A user defined exception have been thrown in SAP HANA. I see code is 10,000 and you see it's a user defined exception. You can also throw a message for an exception, guys, in SAP HANA. So you can come here. This is my exception, and I want to throw a message, text message along with that. So I can easily do it. So there is a syntax to throw a text message along with the exception. So you can use signal SQL error code with text message equals to Anubhav's has his custom exception. I hope this is the syntax if I'm not forgetting it. uh, I'm I'm not really remembering it, but let's try this if this works. Execute. No, it's not the correct one. No. So with text message, I think there is a problem here with this text message. This is something else. uh, Let me just try set message text. This should be the correct one. Let me try this one. Yes, it works. I can remember. So now what will happen when the exception is thrown? This message will be displayed to the user. Instead of custom exception 10,000, this message will be appearing when I run this. Let me run this. And yes, you can see Anubhav has his custom exception. That's how you throw custom exceptions in SAP HANA SQL script. So there is something which is going to fail. You can throw this type of exceptions. Okay. So this will also work, guys, with 1.0. There's no problem with this statement. Only problem is with is empty, record count, these things, setting the data into the table. These things will have problem in 1.0. Then you will say, is that mean in table we can't even assign value? You can. I showed you an example where query output was given to the table type, right? So that's how you can do it. I will also show you an example where if you loop over a cursor, you prepare your array with the data, you can move the data from your array to a table type using unnest statement, which we will see in the next class. So let me copy this custom exception code. This is custom exception code. So custom exception with table functions, table type functions. So it's not database table, guys. Table type is just a type in the created in table in the database. We're creating a variable using table type. Okay, we're creating variable using table type. So what I was not able to show today is cursor and how to get the number of records in the table type. Okay, table variable created using table type, that I was not able to show you. Cursor, I think there is a problem with my 1.0. It is not allowing me to run cursor, but I will cross check that. It's not a big deal. So please practice all these things. Hope you enjoyed today's class. Lots of learning we had on SQL script, but we don't do SQL script for these funny things like addition, summation, all that. We do it for real business logic. So in upcoming chapter I will show you how to write complete SQL script to evaluate our OIA scenario. Okay, you remember open item analysis scenario? We're going to apply that on our OIA scenario, writing complex business logic in SQL script using OIA. That's what we're going to, that is going to be our ultimate goal. And in future, I will also show you some example writing AMDPs using SQL script directly in ABAP. You can create a AMDP class and there you can write your SQL script code directly in ABAP to do a code push down into HANA database, because it gives you all the programming feature. Any questions? We have to also discuss about array types, that is also pending. So hopefully I will give a close to our SQL script chapter in next class along with CE functions. We still left out with creating calculation view using CE functions. We are going to talk about it since now you know procedures. I had also forgot to discuss yet about user defined function, UDFs, and important interview question, difference between user defined function and procedures. Okay, any questions before we close today's class? Anyone? Okay, great. So see you next weekend. Have a nice day and goodbye.